Obsidian Spears, the black tide rolls. Tuarua was not a forgiving world. Its oceans covered nearly all its surface, black and cold as the void. Storms came without warning, roaring across the horizon like stampeding beasts, drowning islands overnight and scouring coastlines bare. Only the hardiest life clung to the volcanic archipelagos that broke the surface, and only the hardest of humanity had endured here long enough to call themselves native. Deep beneath one such island, in the heart of a long-dead volcano, lay the depth. It was no mere fortress monastery. It was the beating heart of the chapter, carved into basalt like the hollowed skull of some vast leviathan. Its tunnels breathed the ocean's air. Its vaults were walled in black stone slick with salt and iron. Those who walked its halls said the sea could be heard at all times, whispering in the walls, reminding them of what they were, not masters of this world, but its sons. And today the depth roared, from the outer piers to the flooded vaults, from the forge halls to the chapel of tides. The fortress was alive with the movement of warriors. Vox klaxons boomed in measured rhythm, a pulse that echoed through the volcanic stone like the beating of a colossal heart. Mortal serfs ran in ordered columns along narrow walkways, their bare feet slapping on wet basalt. Servitors hissed and clicked as they roused the forge fires to greater fury, their limbs sheened with condensation in the ever-humid air. Brother Sergeant Vaikato strode through the Hall of Blades, trident resting against his shoulder. His helm was maglocked at his belt, his face a mask of calm carved by decades of war. Around him, dozens of his brothers marched the same way, the sound of their armored boots striking the basalt floor in perfect unison. At the far end of the hall, a pair of towering adamantine doors stood open, spilling cold blue light into the chamber. Beyond lay the strategium. It was a cavernous space hewn from the mountain's heart, its walls carved with spirals of wave-pattern script older than the Imperium itself. At its center loomed the Lantern of Wrath, its twin braziers dark and waiting. Chapter Master Aranga. Moana stood at the dais, a figure of basalt and tide. His cloak of sea drake hide glistened in the torchlight, its edges still beaded with salt water from ritual immersion. He held the great trident Tewetu Kaihau lightly, as though it weighed nothing, though the haft was as tall as a mortal man. Koata of the Third knelt before him. "Kaunonga burns, master," he said, voice a deep rumble. "Their governor is slain. The PDF have turned traitor and their fleet raids Imperial shipping lanes. Worse, the shrine of Vulcan's vigil has been profaned. Its forge fire burns with warp flame." A hiss went around the council. Captain Tehoka of the Fifth spat. His scarred cheek twisted as he spoke. Exterminatus would be mercy. Scour the island chains. Let them sink beneath the waves and be forgotten. Koata's gaze cut to him like a thrown spear. That forge is a relic of Vulcan's hand. Its flame has burned since before this chapter was born. I stood before it as a neophyte and swore my oath of brotherhood beneath its light. You would have us let that memory burn in corruption? Tehoka's lip curled. I would have us end this quickly before more loyal blood is spilled. You speak of oaths. What of our oath to protect Tuarua and this subsector? Kaunonga's fleet's raid unchecked. A low sound rose from several chaplains, agreement or warning. Vaikato stood behind Koata, silent but watchful. He had fought under the captain for decades and knew that tone. Koata's words were measured, but his stance was iron. He would not yield. Aranga said nothing for a long time. The chapter master descended from the dais, each step echoing like the measured beat of a war drum. The captains parted before him. "This light has not burned since the cleansing of Vylos," Aranga said, standing before the Lantern of Wrath. "Then, as now, our sons fell like rain to reclaim what the darkness had stolen. We will do so again." He struck Tewetu Kaihau against the basalt floor. Sparks leapt. The lantern's braziers ignited with a cold blue flame that filled the chamber with harsh light. "Sound the great muster," Aranga commanded. "Every company to war strength. The Obsidian Spears shall bring the tide that cleanses. Kaunongan will burn until its forge burns true." The Hall of Tides was the largest space in the depth, a black cathedral of volcanic stone whose ceiling was high enough to lose itself in darkness. Its walls were carved with the chapter's history, each campaign etched in spirals of ocean script. Hundreds of Astartes stood in rank upon rank, not merely an army but a living wall of iron. Their black armor gleamed with sacred oil, their tridents and bolters held upright. The air was hot with the hiss of reactor cores and the smell of sanctified oils, thick enough to taste. At the far end of the hall blazed the great forge. Tonight it would go dark for the first time in decades. Tech Marines moved to the sacred levers. With a groan of stone, the vents were closed. The flame guttered, choked, and finally died. The hall fell silent. Chaplain Kahai's voice carried like a wave breaking on rock. "This fire shall remain cold until Kaunongan is cleansed, until the vigil's flame is kindled once more." The chaplains dipped their fingers into bowls of fine volcanic ash, pressing it to each captain's brow in a curved line that swept from temple to temple. It was more than a mark. It was the shadow of a wave, the crest of the tide. In old Tuaruan tradition, it was worn by those preparing for cleansing rites. Hunters who scoured the reef of predators, warriors who washed blood from the shore. It was not merely mourning, it was a vow. A promise that what was corrupted would be made clean, no matter the cost. When Koata returned to stand with his company, Vaikato could see the grey line of ash drying on his brow like a scar. A quiet tension settled over the hall. Not fear, not grief, but the weight of inevitability. Somewhere beyond the walls, drums waited. The arena at the volcano's heart was open to the sky, a circle of basalt terraces that dropped toward a central floor slick with spray. The sea's roar carried up from the cliffs below, and the air smelled of salt and ozone. The entire chapter stood in rings around the floor, every brother present. Mortals lined the upper galleries, some on their knees, some weeping openly to witness what few had seen in their lives. The first drum struck, a deep sound that rolled through the arena. Another followed. The tempo built, slow and measured. Aranga Moana stepped to the center and drove Tewetu Kaihau into the floor. "Wakaritia, prepare yourselves." The answering roar was like the opening of a storm. The haka began. Astartes struck breastplates in unison, the sound like breakers on rock. Their boots crashed against basalt, dust shaking loose from the terraces. Voices rose, deep and guttural, the old tongue thundering like a chant of gods. "We are the tide that breaks the reef. We are the storm that shakes the deep. The ash shall wash away. The forge shall burn again." Vaikato felt it through his armor, through the very stone beneath his feet. His twin hearts hammered in time with the drums. The tempo quickened. The stomps came faster, the chant harsher, until the sound filled the world. The final shout was a roar that shook the amphitheater and sent flocks of seabirds wheeling from the cliffs into the night. When the silence fell, it was absolute. Aranga raised his trident. "Kaunongan has fallen to ash," he said, his voice carrying like the tide. "We are the tide that will sweep it clean. To war, brothers, until the forge burns true." The chapter slammed fists to breastplates, the final thunderclap sealing the vow. The warriors filed from the arena in ordered silence, the vow still hanging in the air like smoke from a gun. Thunderhawks lifted from their bays, rising through the volcanic shaft in waves, their engines a rolling growl that faded into the night. When the last of them vanished into the sky, the fortress seemed to exhale. The forge halls and muster bays fell still. Far below, the sea's murmur returned, patient and relentless, a slow, steady drumbeat, waiting for its sons to return. The stars of Kaunongan burned like cold lanterns on the flagship's forward panes. A haze of distant debris ringed the outer moon, a glimmering shoal of broken metal and ice reflecting the light of the fat, cloud-shrouded planet below. Into that silent reef came the Obsidian Spears. The chapter's fleet bled from the warp, as though surfacing from a black sea. Translocation lightning crawled over adamantine hulls, then faded to a dim sheen that showed the marks of centuries, scrimshaw glyphs inlaid along prows, votive plates hammered into place by tech marines. At the center of the formation cruised the battle barge Tides Eternal, its armored flanks studded with launch bays and macro batteries like the armored plates of a sea drake. To either side took station the strike cruisers Reef's Aegis, Moana's Fang, and Koru of Night, screened by a crescent of gliding escorts. On the command dais of the Tides Eternal, Chapter Master Aranga Moana watched the system unfold in hololithic blue. The orbits traced clean arcs, the threat runes burned a harsh red. He did not lean forward, did not tense. He stood as he always did, breathing with the patience of tides. "Contact," intoned a Vox officer. Multiple aggressors, outer moon, dark side approach vectors, hull signatures, captured Imperial pattern with non-standard emissions. Machine spirits report profane overlays. "Traitor flotillas," said Captain Tehoka from the Tactica rail, voice clipped. "Old patrol frigates, one destroyer and that," he added, as a polluting bloom of energy rippled on the display. The ship's auger chimed. Warpwake anomaly. Spined raider, likely heretic manufacture, spur-mounted lances. Aranga's trident tip lifted a fraction, as if scenting the water. "Bring us to battle speed," he said. "Predator's gate, not shark's rush. They will test our line, they will not break it." Acknowledgements rippled outward. Engines answered with a deepening tremor that ran through deck and bone alike. Along the flanks of the Tides Eternal, rows of macro-cannon housing cycled open like gills. Koata, helm mag-locked at his belt, spoke low to a cluster of sergeants at his back. "Third Company boarding elements stand to. Vaikato." "Ready," said Vaikato. His trident was locked to a wall bracket beside him, a brutal shadow against the deck's cold light. He could already taste oil and propellant, already hear the way a bulkhead sounded when it rang to the tread of armored boots. Duty settled over him like a familiar cloak. "Today we cut rot from the hull," Koata said, and turned back to the dais. The first exchange was distant and almost elegant. The escort frigates flared their main batteries, bright knives of light crossing the span. The Spears escorts answered with curt precision, rolling to present their broadsides. The void filled with silent thunder. Coins of light blossomed against void shields and rippled away. The heretic raider came on like a hooked beast dragging its own shadow. Knotty pylons strapped to its underside, prow crowded with blade-hard fins. It cut across the flank of Reef's Aegis, lances stuttering. The strike cruiser's shields glimmered, a wind ruffle on dark water. Then Reef's Aegis replied with a full volley. Macro shells traced bright parabolas, half a dozen finding home along the raider's spine. Metal buckled, warp bolts sputtered and guttered out. "Signal from Moana's Fang," a Vox officer reported. "Enemy destroyer attempting to break contact, striking for the debris ring." "Deny," Aranga said calm. "Cut its path. We will not hunt this quarry for days." The escorts moved like a schooling strike. Two fast corvettes slipped ahead of the destroyer, bled speed and turned to rake its prow with bombardment cannon. The destroyer's nose peeled like wet bark. It listed, vents bleeding, augury beacons wailing in a chaos screech that made mortal crew flinch and mutter warding litanies. On the hololith, new red motes winked into being, hugging Kaunonga's night side. Port emissions. Launch flares wove up like sparks from a burning altar. Surface-to-orbit missiles, Tehoka said, a quick click of teeth. They've armored the docks hard. We expected as much, Koata replied, the words steady. Point defenses are intercepting. Aranga's gaze did not leave the hololith. Prepare boarding torpedoes, he said. Select targets of command value, the destroyer first. Then we take the throat from the raider. He turned his head the slightest fraction. Koata. Koata bowed his head. Third will cut, Master. The boarding torpedo bay was a canyon of steel, its walls strung with cradle racks like the ribs of a leviathan. Vaikato stepped into the coffin warmth of the assault shell, mag clamps locking with dull thunks around his boots and greaves. The air smelled of machine oil and cold iron. Through the face slit, he could see the blue lines of lumen filaments tracing the inside of the launch tube. Once within, Koata's voice sounded across the squad net. We kill engines and climb. The ship's heart will be forward of the midline. Expect corrupted rites of machine mastery. Hard kill the engine room. Do not attempt to talk to the spirit. Spoil sport, muttered Brother Hecker, good humor ghosting through the static. You talk, it answers, Vaikato said, mouth quirking, and not with words you want to hear. Blue went green. A klaxon thrummed twice. Third spear by the numbers, Koata said. For Vulcan, for the depth. For the depth, Vaikato shouted, and the torpedo slammed him backward as the launch bolts fired. The void was weight and silence. The torpedo shuddered once when the outer hull's guide vanes bit vacuum. Then there was only the faint whine of the cutter nose and the wink of guidance runes. Vaikato breathed with his hearts, slow and metered. The world narrowed to the sound of his armor's soft fans and the thready hiss of the torpedo's thrusters trimming course. Impact struck like a god's hammer. The cutter nose screamed. Saw teeth chewed through the destroyer's outer hull, molten metal weeping along the seams. Then the clamps fired, and the charges blew the torpedo's face to daylight. Daylight in the heart of a corrupted ship was red and wrong. Vaikato went through the breach at a run, storm bolter thudding in tight, ruthless bursts. Cult militia in torn naval blacks and rag filth tripped over loose cable runs and died with neat holes punched through their masks. A servitor lurched from a side gantry, limbs repurposed into a tangle of saws. Heiki's trident went in low, prongs biting under its jaw ring and wrenched up. Sparks spat. It collapsed in a rain of cog teeth. The corridor reeked of spoiled oils and cloying incense. Sigils had been smeared along the bulkheads in tar black. Vaikato stepped through them, boot soles leaving clean arcs in the filth. Hard starboard stair, Koata snapped. Up two. Lock the hatch behind us. They climbed like spear points through the ship's throat, stacking on doors, cutting, killing, moving before bodies finished falling. Twice the lights flickered, and the floor lurched as the destroyer tried to evade, pointless spasms under the tide's eternal's raking fire. On the second deck, a chorus of vox snarls rose and fell like animal panting. Vaikato felt the hair prickle along his neck, where gene-printed skin still remembered being mortal. Demon host, Heki breathed. Chant jammer, Koata said, cheap trick, left door. The engine room was a cathedral of pistons and deck bridges, its core a coughing sun. Blasphemous fetishes hung from the gantries, a robed figure turned, mask a weld of iron and teeth, vox grills sputtering syllables that made the lumen strips shiver. Vaikato shot him twice through the chest. The figure fell. Other shapes rose. The squad stormbolters spoke as one, And when the echoes died, so did everything else. "Charges," Koata said, as if discussing the weather. He placed his own with stripped speed, hands a blur. Time to their next burn. "Seal the door behind us," Vaikato added. "Let them blissfully run to meet the Emperor." They withdrew through smoke and dying light, a clean slice back through the ship's veins. When they leapt the breach into the waiting torpedo hull and mag clamped home, the timed charges found their mark. The destroyer convulsed, spine arching. Through the face slit, Vaikato watched its heart go out in a soft belch of atmosphere and flame. The hull sagged, lights dying like drowned fireflies. "Third report's finished," Koata's voice cut across the net. "Target neutralized." In the strategium, runes faded from red to cold gray. The heretic raider broke, trying to rake Koru of night with a last spiteful lance burst before its own engines coughed blood. The escorts hemmed it with tidy cruelty and peeled its guns away. In less than an hour, the outer shoal was cleared. The spears took position in high orbit, their hulls dark against Kaunonga's clouded face. "Well, I think they know we are here," Tehoka reported. His tone left no triumph to leak away. Signals from the nightside ports increasing. Orbital space secured. "Of course they do," Koata murmured. "The reef knows when the tide turns." Aranga's eyes were on the planet. "Begin 10 company insertions," he said. The 10th moved like rain you only noticed when you were already wet. The Scout's storm ravens broke from the shadow of the tides eternal and fell on long, shallow arcs that bled them into the darkness over Kaunonga's oceans. Clouds chewed at their wings, lightning skittered along their hulls, harmless as minnows. At 6,000 meters, hatches yawned and black shapes spilled into the night. Grav chutes opened as breaths on glass. Scout Sergeant Vaikato tasted the storm with his face bared to it, paint dark across his skin, his hair bound back with a bone pin. The world below was a quilt of lightning-limbed waves and inked silhouettes of islands. He counted under his breath. At 200, he flared and ghosted over jungle like a leaf from a high branch. He landed in a space no larger than a skiff deck and rolled into shadow. His squad thumped down around him, as quiet as rain ending. "Positions," he breathed. They moved through jungle that smelled of wet iron and sap. Trees hung heavy with fungal fronds that glowed faintly like drowned stars. Somewhere far to the east, a bell tolled a slow, wrong rhythm. They left no marks. Where their boots fell, leaves settled back as if no one had passed at all. At the island's north point, the jungle gave onto a broken escarpment. Vaikato went to his belly and slid forward the last meter, paint cold on his cheeks. Below lay a harbor like a scabbed wound, crane stalks frozen mid-gesture, docks piled with shapes under oilcloth. Fires burning in pits where men knelt and swayed and cut their own skin. A half-dozen corvettes rocked gently against their lines, hulls painted in crude sigils, machine spirits muzzled with iron collars. At the harbor's heart, a heavy gun battery squatted under a crown of rebar and prayer flags, its barrels turned up toward the stars like tusks. Vaikato flicked open the Auspex slate. Runes crawled, heat signatures, cold spots, muzzle glints. He thumbed through the picked modes until he had layered a map from the night. 0 observation 310. Alpha, he whispered. North Harbor Kaunonga Prime grid 7-2. Enemy has 5 active S2O tubes, 2 idle. Belt-fed autocannon upon 3 towers, rotating 6 seconds. Patrols 2 and 2 on the East Quay. Civilians present, pen stockades. Estimated 1,000 head, marking all. The data rose like smoke through the sky, caught by a waiting relay drone. and threaded itself into the tide's Eternal's glass blue maps. Elsewhere, a second scout team ghosted through salt marsh toward a low black line of bunkers. The smell here was old blood and burned prayer ink. The bunkers' firing slots were lipped with teeth hammered from brass. A sentry in a half-armored carapace leaned in a doorway and chewed dried something, spitting occasionally into the grit. A shadow crossed the doorway and kept going. He blinked once and then blinked no more, the hole through his forehead neat as a rivet. When he fell, the shadow was already gone, slipping into a culvert that ran down to the sea. 0 Observation 310. Charlie, a new voice whispered. South Battery, 5 kilometers west of City Sprawl, bunker line 2 deep. Underground service tunnels linked to fuel store. Recommending demolition, secondary strike on tunnel throat, minimal civilian presence. 0. This is Observation 310 Bravo, Mathieu heard over the vox, barely louder than the rain. Visual on the vigil. They had crawled to a ridge above the corrupted shrine. It had once been basalt black and honest stone, built like a lighthouse around the clean burn of a sacred forge. Now its spire bulged and twisted, veined with slag that pulsed faintly as if it had a terrible heartbeat. Warp fire burned within the open mouth of the forge, like a breath that never ended. Green gone to bruise purple, heat shimmering up to deform the air. Around its base, banners stitched from flayed canvas snapped and cracked. Men knelt there, their backs cut with fresh ritual lines that traced blasphemies. The forge's chimney, once a simple throat, had been split open like a grin to let the wrong light pour out. Mathieu did not speak for several breaths. When he did, the words were flat, as if the air had cooled them. Picked captures attached. Enemy reserves here are heavy infantry and engine-borne, 2 defilers, 1 hellbrute on chain, 20 heavy stubber nests, some overlapping fields, presence of witch sign strong. I advise, do not attempt preliminary altar seizure with mortals, only Astartes, only fast. The relay drone took the picks and spat them into the void. The strategium darkened as the hololith took new shape. The reef lines of Kaunonga's coasts resolved in sharp relief, flickering with the scouts' tags. Gun batteries, bunker lines, launch facilities, penned civilians, shanty cities long gone to cult. Over all of it yawned the vigil like a wound. Captains took their places along the rail. War priests paced, whispering litanies to the machine spirits sharing their air. Aranga did not move for some time. When he did, it was to reach into the hololith and rearrange a cluster of red runes with the head of his trident. Here, here, and here, he said. The gun throats. We must break their upward teeth before we can strike downward with our own. Strike wings? A vox priest bowed. Storm Eagles stand ready, Fury interceptors on outer picket, Thunderhawks fueled. Tehoka's finger traced a clean arc from orbit to shore. We burn the North Harbor first, he said. Kill its heavy tubes. The battery on the south can be blinded by interference if we thread the moonside window. He glanced across the table at Koata. You'll want the vigil early. Koata's mouth did not soften. I want it silent, he said, but we don't throw ourselves at a cliff in a first wave. He tipped his head toward the bunker line icons. Break their ports, break their guns, then break their heart. Third takes the North Harbor, Tehoka said, conceding as a man might nod to the logic of an incoming tide. Fifth will rake the southern tubes and fold left. Second can spear along the causeway, cut the city sprawl from the docks, and hold until armor lands. First? Asked a chaplain, referring to the elite first company of the chapter. his voice like gravel in a tin. "Held in reserve," Arunga said. A murmur swept the rail, assent, not reluctance. When the fortresses remember fear first falls. The hololith ticked and measured. Fresh packets rose from the surface. Matthew again, a sweep of the harbor's rotations. A scout team placing charges along a culvert throat and backing away as muddy water hissed over a burning fuse. Another, high on a mangled crane, counting cult banners and marking which posts held heavy weapon umbilicals. On a secondary screen, a thin column of script scrolled, the names of villages along an island chain west of the vigil. Many had been struck through with a single neat line. Koata's jaw worked once. "Civilians," he said low. "They cut them for the fire." Vaikato heard the words and filed them where he filed all things that heartened his step. He had not removed his armor since the boarding. The ash line across Koata's brow had smeared and been renewed, a grey curve like a frozen wave. Tehoka had no prayers. He watched range figures and burn windows, and found the spaces where the enemy could not, in any honest math, win. "We can put our armor on their causeways in 3 hours if the first strike cracks clean," he said. "If it does not, we shift weight to the north and let the south starve." A beat. "And if the vigil vomits something uglier than we expect, then we light the sea," Koata said without drama. Silence, clean and brief, the kind shared by men who have spoken the worst possibility aloud and found it survivable. A chime sounded. The hololith flowered with new image, grainy, high contrast but unmistakable. The vigil's forge mouth bellowing its bruise flame, a heat haze writhing above it like a thing learning to breathe. The camera panned, steady hands despite the wind. It found the old plaque over the main door, half slagged, the words burned but not erased. "Vulcan's Vigil, the flame remembers." Someone had daubed over the word flame with a crooked script in some other language. The paint still dripped. No one spoke for a long breath. Arunga's hand tightened on Te Wetu Kaihau until the haft creaked. His voice, when it came, was slow and low, like the first draw of a tide that intends to be king. "They think the sea forgets," he said. "They do not know our sea." He lifted the trident, and the hololithic light made green fire along its prongs. "Strike wings to launch positions," he said. "Scout teams hold their hides and keep their eyes open until our guns speak. All companies to their thunderhawks. We go to take their teeth. When the dawn comes to Kaunongan, it will not be theirs." Orders ran like current through iron. The strategium stirred. Chaplains turning to their flocks, tech marines slipping away to wake machine spirits with ritual knocks and whispered names. Vaikato felt the ship change around him, the way an old war beast squares its shoulders before it charges. On the lower decks, hangar bays yawned open to the star-salted dark. Crew carts rattled. Servitors trundled munitions to waiting birds. The air smelled of coolant and burned propellant and the bitter tang of consecrated oils. Concealed in the roots of an ancient tree, Scout Sergeant Matthew watched the harbor through a slit in a slab of concrete that tasted of old salt on his tongue. Cultists dragged something across the quay, a chain, heavy, clanking. He counted them without thinking, eyes moving, hands still. Above him, clouds seethed. Far out to sea, lightning walked on the waves on thin blue legs. "Observation 310. Alpha," he whispered to the drone mic. "Patrol shift. Heavier weapons moving to the east tower. Marking marked. Recommend first wave uses the rain window at 0517 local. Thermal clutter will mask your runs." He settled his cheek back to the stone. The forge at the vigil flared again, a belly spasm. The heat of it made the harbor's slick water sweat. In orbit, the Tides Eternal rotated a fraction, presenting its broadside in a caress of motion, not a threat, but a promise. On its command dais, Aranga Moana stood and listened to his fleet breathe. Koata came to stand a pace behind and to the left, as he had 100 times. "Third will take the North Harbor," Koata said, a statement, not a question. "You will break it," Aranga said, cleanly and without waste. "At dawn," Koata said. "At dawn," Aranga agreed. He lifted the trident a finger's width, and the ship seemed to come a breath closer to its own contained storm. "Prepare the storm." The storm had not broken by dawn. Kaunongan's sky was a lid of black iron, its clouds laced with heat lightning. Rain slicked the escarpments and turned the jungle floor to sucking mud, but the scouts held their hides. They lay still beneath tar camo and frond screens, rifles resting on bipods, eyes on the harbor below. Scout Sergeant Matthew pressed a finger to his earbed as the orbital window opened on his slate. A green rune blinked confirmation. Strike craft were inbound. "Zero, this is observation 310 Alpha," he whispered, voice flat with calm. "I have eyes on target grid 7-2. Marking with infralays. Requesting fire mission. Type 1 control, danger close." On the harbor's east quay, a gun tower swept its barrel slowly back and forth. Matthew's finger found the trigger stud on his designator and pressed. A tight beam of invisible light painted the tower's centerline. "Laser on." "Confirm basket." "Basket confirmed," came the reply, tinny but cool over the link. The voice was a rapidly approaching Thunderhawk pilot. Strike 2-1, calm as an empty tide. "Cleared hot," Matthew said. The sky growled. A moment later, the first Thunderhawk came screaming in at rooftop height, wing flaps bleeding contrails in the rain. Its belly bay doors yawned, and a brace of crack missiles dropped free and lit their motors. The gun tower disappeared in a blossom of shrapnel and fire. The concussions slapped Matthew's face and made the jungle fronds quiver. Secondary explosions rippled up the quay as the ready magazines cooked off. "Target down," Matthew reported. "Shift 50 left, next gun tower, laser on." "Copy shift 50. We have your sparkle," the pilot answered. Two more Thunderhawks roared in low, their autocannons stitching the quay with explosive shells before rolling hard to port and climbing back into cloud. The harbor was awake now. Sirens howled and spotlights swept the dark. Patrols shouted, dragging mortars toward the firing line. Matthew ignored them. "Zero, observation 310 Alpha," he said. "Recommend immediate reattack on grid 7-3. Armor moving to quayside." "Copy observation 310 Alpha," came the reply. "Strike 2-1 and 2-2 reattacking. Time on target 10 seconds. Roger, cleared hot." The next pass was lower. Matthew saw the gleam of wet plating as the Thunderhawks' hulls flashed overhead, turbines rattling the jungle leaves. Their rockets hit like thrown spears, punching clean through the armored vehicle's decks before detonating inside. Fire geysered from the top hatches. "Splash," Matthew confirmed. "Grid 7-3 neutralized." "Zero, this is observation 310. Alpha, guns are blind, recommend landing." "Confirmed observation 310 Alpha," came the reply. "Thunderhawks are committed, stand by." The first wave came as a rumble felt in the chest more than heard. Then the cloud split, and Thunderhawks dropped through like black birds of omen. Their engines howled against the storm, downdraft flattening trees and flinging spray from the harbor's surface. Matthew and his squad watched in silence as the ramps dropped, and squads of black-armored Astartes stormed into the surf. Bolters barked almost immediately, their sound sharp and clean amid the rolling thunder. "Observation 310 Alpha," Matthew said, breaking down his rifle. "Moving to phase line coral to provide overwatch on the left flank." The scouts melted back into the foliage, leaving the shattered quay to the advancing squads of Astartes. Brother Sergeant Vaikato hit the beach at a run. Water sheeted up to his knees, trident held low. His boots struck mud, then stone, then key, as the Thunderhawk behind him hosed the landing zone with its nose gun to keep the cultists' heads down. Third form! Koata's voice cut across the squad net, crisp as a knife strike. Vaikato signaled his fire team forward, forming the company's leftmost point. Bolter fire cracked and sparked off metal crates stacked high along the dock. Vaikato hurled a frag through the gap, felt the concussion slap against his chest plate, then surged in with storm bolter hammering. The defenders broke. Some fled toward the warehouses, others simply dropped their weapons and raised bleeding hands. Koata gave no order to take prisoners. Third advanced methodically, clearing each section of key, stacking on doors and breaching with melter charges. Above, Storm Eagles made another pass, guns chewing through a pair of last-ditch autocannon nests. Observation 3. 10 Alpha, Matthew's voice crackled over the net. Enemy armor staging south of the key, marking with lays. Koata's response was instant. Strike package Tertius 7 cleared hot. The Storm Eagles banked hard and came around, unloading rockets into the armor line. The blasts turned the staging area into a storm of fire and shrapnel, cooking off munitions and scattering the surviving crew. Landing zone secured, Koata voxed, his voice measured but not cold. Signal to fleet, begin landing second wave, the reef is broken. By the time the last shot was fired, the North Harbor was a smoke-shrouded ruin. Cult banners burned where they had been nailed to the quay walls. Astartes moved among the shattered docks, kicking weapons into piles, planting chapter standards along the waterfront. Vaikato paused beside a rusted crane and looked toward the interior of the island. Black smoke twisted up from the vigil's direction, glowing faintly with warp light. The sight hardened something in him. Still standing, Heke muttered at his side. Not for long, Vaikato said, trident dripping rain. In orbit, Aranga Moana watched the picked feed from the lead Thunderhawk. His expression did not change as the harbor came into view, blackened but held. North Harbor secured, Tehoka reported. Aranga's hand rested on the haft of Tewetu Kaihau. Then we are ashore, he said quietly. Signal the fleet. Begin massed landings. Kaunonga's teeth are gone. Now we break its spine. The rain thickened as the day wore on. Third Company dug in along the northern quay, turning the shattered harbor into a fortress. Auspex drones rose into the air, their red lenses sweeping the perimeter. Tarpaulins were strung across broken gantries to shield ammo caches from the downpour. The smell of promethium and wet metal hung heavy over everything. Matthew's scouts had ranged out into no man's land to provide early warning of any movement, as well as to destroy any enemy reconnaissance doing the same as them. 30 minutes ago, they had warned of an approaching column from the vigil. Now, Vaikato crouched beside the quay wall, helm lenses glowing faintly in the gloom as he surveyed the kill zone beyond. His squad was spread across a row of blasted cargo sheds, forming the company's leftmost anchor. Mine set, he voxed. Set, replied Heke, his voice a low growl. We've wired the causeway choke. Nothing rolls through without losing wheels. Good, Vaikato said. Across the harbor, guardsmen of the 117th Hestian Amphibious Rifles were arriving by low-slung troop craft, their hulls still slick from the surf. They disembarked in orderly lines under the looming shadows of Astartes. Their captain saluted Koata, who gave a single curt nod and pointed him toward the southern perimeter. This isn't the time for a stand-up fight, Koata told him. You hold until the second wave lands, then dig your foxholes. The storm will do the rest. The first shells came just before midnight, dropping out of the clouds with a hollow whistle. The first landed short, throwing a column of water into the quay. The second struck closer, splintering a section of jetty and shredding 2 servitors. "Counter battery," Koata barked. "Track those tubes." Ospec's runes flared on Vaikato's HUD. The scouts were already at work. "Strike 2-1, this is observation 310 Alpha," came Matthew's calm voice over the net. "Enemy mortars firing from grid 6-8 behind a ridgeline. Marking now." "Copy observation 310 Alpha," answered Strike 2-1 from altitude. "We have your sparkle. Stand by for ordnance." "Cleared hot," Matthew said. 5 seconds later, the ridgeline erupted as rockets tore through it. The return fire stopped. "Splash," Matthew reported, somewhat redundantly. "Thrown," said an unknown voice over the vox. "You think?" "Good work, 3 Alpha," Koata cut in, already shifting attention to the eastern key. "Third, contact front. Send these heretical scum to the warp." Shapes were moving in the storm. Trucks and crawlers, their headlights dimmed and tarps rigged for cover. The traitors came howling, firing stubbers and las rifles as they advanced. The first line tripped the mines. The blast hurled men and metal into the air in a boiling arc. "Fire!" Vaikato roared. The key lit up as dozens of bolters barked in unison. Explosive shells ripped through the lead vehicles, flipping one on its side and turning the next into a fireball. The remaining attackers scattered and tried to advance through the smoke. "Keep them off the wire," Hecker shouted. He braced his trident in the rubble and fired short, disciplined bursts until the magazine ran dry. The cultists pressed hard. Twice they reached the barricades, and twice Vaikato's squad met them in brutal close-quarters combat, tridents and chainswords flashing in the dark. One of the guardsman platoons broke under pressure, but Koata was already moving, his stormbolter roaring as he waded into the gap. The line held. 3-0, this is OBS 310-0. Matthew's voice cut through the storm. Armor convoy moving down South Causeway. 12 vehicles, half-tracked. Suggest interdiction before they reach grid 7-2. Copy 310-0, we have strike wings on station. 3 Storm Eagles screamed in low from the sea, their engines a rolling howl. Bomb racks opened, spilling cluster munitions across the causeway. When the fire and dust cleared, nothing was left but burning hulks. By 0300, the fighting had faded away. The rain hissed against burning wrecks and the harbor was quiet again, save for the groan of distant thunder and the occasional shot as patrolling guardsmen executed wounded enemy. "Perimeter secure," Vaikato voxed. His armor was pitted and slick with rain, his trident stained dark. "Enemy broken." "Confirmed," Koata replied. "Third holds, casualty report to follow." When morning came, the storm finally broke. Pale light spilled across the ruined quay, revealing the cost of the night. Wrecked vehicles smoked where they had been caught in the kill zone. Corpses lay tangled in the mud. The chapter's banner snapped wetly in the breeze over the North Harbor. Vaikato stood on the quay wall, helm off, rainwater dripping from the scars on his face. Beyond the harbor, the vigil still burned purple-black. "This was just the first round," Heku said, joining him, as he placed his helm back on. Vaikato nodded once. "Then we break the second harder." In orbit, Aranga Moana stood over the hololith as fresh reports came in from the campaigns being fought around the planet by his companies. North Harbor held through the night, Tehoka reported. Enemy counterattack broken. Light casualties, causeways choked with wreckage. "Good," Aranga said. His trident struck the deck once, ringing like a bell. "Then we push inland. The heart of Kaunongan waits, and we shall cut it out." The harbor stank of smoke and wet ash. The night's battle had left its mark. Burned-out trucks lay like carcasses across the quay. Blood swirled in the gutters, carried out to sea by rainwater that hissed off smoldering wrecks. Servitors hauled the imperial dead into rows. traitors were simply cast into the water. Apothecaries knelt over the fallen Astartes, gloved hands moving with careful precision as they removed gene seed from cooling flesh and locked it in reliquary vials. Brother Sergeant Vaikato stood at the edge of one such scene, helm maglocked at his belt. Brother Tahu lay on a shroud of tarpaulin, his chestplate holed through by a heavy stubber round that had punched clean between his plates. Chaplain Tuaranga murmured the litany of return, sealing the reliquary with a final blessing. "His fire returns to the forge," the chaplain said softly. Vaikato nodded once, and we carry it forward. Across the quay, the guardsmen of the 117th Hestian Amphibious Rifles were stacking their dead, burning them on a pyre of broken pallets and jetty planks. Their captain, a weathered man with a rebreather scar around his jaw, saluted as Koata passed. "We're ready to move, my lord," the man said. "Columns loaded, men are steady." Koata's reply was solemn, a low rumble like distant surf. "Then you march with us, keep your flanks tight. Kaunongan will not give us another quiet night." At first light, the spearhead rolled out. Predators rumbled onto the causeway, their autocannons level and las sponsons twitching like hunting hounds' ears. Whirlwinds and a lone vindicator followed, their machine spirits singing low through the vox hymns of their crews. Behind them ground the Hestian amphibious carriers and basilisks, the mortal troops crammed inside, faces set and grim. Koata rode inside a Land Raider Proteus at the center of the column, its machine spirit a patient growl beneath his boots. Tehoka's voice came over the net, clipped but not hurried. Predators are keyed, whirlwinds are loaded, basilisks ready to sing the first note. Koata's reply was calm as a tide before a storm. "Then we move. The reef ahead will be sharp, but we are sharper." Vaikato voxed to his squad, voice dry but steady. "Third squad, mount up, stay loose, this road is going to bite." They found the enemy waiting less than 5 kilometers from the harbor. A barricade of burned-out haulers blocked the causeway. 2 heavy stubbers stitched into the wreckage. Vaikato's rhino ground to a halt. He hit the ramp release and ran into the wet grit, bolter already raised. "Third squad left shoulder," he snapped. Heke's weapon spat bolts, chewing through the wreckage and silencing the first gun. Vaikato hosed fire into the second nest until the gunner fell back screaming. "Thunderhawk strike, grid 5-4, center line of the causeway," Vaikato voxed. "Friendlies offset south, cleared hot." "Strike 2-3 copies," came the pilot's calm reply. The gunship roared down the causeway, its nose gun hammering. The barricade became a fireball, charred haulers collapsing into smoking metal skeletons. "Push through before they reman," Vaikato barked. The squad surged ahead. A last round caught Brother Tain's pauldron, spinning him sideways. Heke grabbed him, dragging him back into cover. "Plate breach only," Heke reported. "He'll walk." "Then walk faster," Vaikato said grimly, waving them forward. "We've got kilometers to burn." At grid 5-6, the column halted. High-velocity cracks rang out from a ridgeline ahead. 2 Hestians dropped in the mud, one thrashing as blood misted his visor. "Sniper!" Vaikato shouted, opening fire with his bolter. "Scouts forward," Koata ordered. Matthew's team moved like ink through water, 2 bounding, 2 covering, never still. Their drills were second nature. 1 pair went to ground, sighted on the ridge, fired 2 clean shots. The other pair sprinted 10 meters, sliding into position behind a root tangle, weapons ready. "Contact ridge line, 3 firing points," Matthew voxed, voice calm. "Enemy is shifting positions between shots. We're closing." Another shot cracked, splintering a tree. Matthew sighted and returned fire. Left nest suppressed, bounding. They surged forward again, and the next round took Scout Tucker clean through the chest. He fell into the ferns, motionless. "Man down," hissed his partner. Acknowledged, Matu said, tone flat. Finish the fight. The scouts broke into a final rush, storming the ridge. 3 traitor marksmen lay sprawled, rifles still clutched in their hands. Matu put a last round into the nearest man's skull, then turned away. Sniper team neutralized, 1 KIA marking grid for retrieval. Down on the road, Vaikato saw the kill feed through his helm link. He set his trident butt down in the mud in silent salute as the column rolled forward once more. At the next causeway, the trap was waiting. As the lead predator reached the center span, a charge went off beneath it. The blast tore out the decking and sent the tank nose first into the marsh. The crew never made it out. Thrown, Tehoka muttered over the net. They're fighting smart, bleeding us. Bridge it, Koata said evenly, and keep moving. Combat engineers sprinted forward under fire, dragging armored planks into place. Vaikato's squad threw smoke and cleared the far bank room by room, bolter fire echoing under the mangroves. 1 guardsman took a last round through the neck, dropping with the det cord still in his hands. Smoke out, Vaikato barked. His squad advanced through the haze, bolters hammering into the tree line as snipers tried to pin them down. The air stank of ozone and burning promethium. Heke fired from the hip, trident bolter roaring, cutting down a pair of cultists who broke from the tree line. More came behind them, ragged shapes in soaked rags, howling praises to some dead god as they charged through the mire. The Hestians met them with disciplined volleys, green uniformed figures firing from behind the burned-out basilisk. A captured truck rumbled from the far bank, a stubborn jury rigged to its bed. Its first burst shredded an engineer team before Vaikato could signal. He voxed instantly, voice tight. Strike 2-1, close air. Grid 5-7, far bank of the causeway, danger close. Copy 2-1 inbound. The Thunderhawk came in low, splitting the clouds, its cannon roaring. The truck disintegrated under a storm of fire, shrapnel and mud fountaining into the air. The cult line broke instantly, vanishing into the reeds. When the smoke cleared, the causeway was a ruin, half of it submerged, the rest slick with rain and blood. The Predator's turret still burned where it had sunk into the marsh. When it was finally secure, the column rolled across, every vehicle clattering as if in salute to the Predator, and its lost crew still half submerged below. By late afternoon they reached the major junction, and the real fight began. The road split there, one branch bending toward the ruined city, the other vanishing into mangrove swamps where smoke hung thick and low. The junction itself was a kill zone, sandbag lines crisscrossing the approach, rusted habshells turned into bunkers, and 2 captured basilisks dug in on the far side with their barrels trained down the causeway. Every flat surface was pitted with impact scars, and every shadow promised an ambush. The moment the lead vehicles rolled into view, the enemy opened fire. The first basilisk round screamed overhead and slammed into the ocean 50 meters off the causeway, sending a geyser of spray higher than a spire. The second hit dead on, punching through a whirlwind's hull and gutting it in a blast of flame and shrapnel. Third company, Koata voxed, calm but hard. Form for assault, whirlwinds, ripple fire, basilisks, counter battery. The ground shook as return fire thundered from the column. Missiles shrieked into the enemy lines, explosions bursting through the smoke and rain. The basilisks answered back, their gun crews howling defiance even as shrapnel tore them apart. The air turned into a solid wall of noise. Vaikato's rhino slammed to a halt behind the burning whirlwind. His squad poured out, bolters raised, boots splashing through mud and oil. Tracer fire raked across the causeway from both sides, red and green streaks cutting the mist in blinding arcs. Heki, right flank. Tain, on me. The squad bounded forward, firing as they went. Vaikato's bolter barked with each pull of the trigger, the explosive bolts chewing through the sandbag wall ahead. One of the Hestian carriers pulled alongside, its side hatches opening to reveal guardsmen firing from within. Their captain, his face streaked with grime, was shouting something that vanished beneath the roar of guns. A last burst caught him across the arm, spinning him out of sight. A basilisk shell slammed into the roadway nearby, flipping a section of deck plate clean into the air. The blast wave threw 2 guardsmen into the water and hurled Vaikato sideways into a crater. He landed hard, armor scraping concrete, rain hissing against the hot ceramite of his pauldron. He forced himself up just as another detonation lit the horizon. Tehoka's voice cut in. "Predators advancing. Left gun destroyed. They're breaking." It was true. Through the smoke, Vaikato could see the basilisks faltering, one gun's barrel drooping under its own weight. The other fired again, then went silent, its crew reduced to smoldering shapes behind the parapet. "Forward," Koata ordered, his voice like the surf pounding the shore. "Take the junction." The Astartes surged ahead. The Hestians followed, firing and advancing through knee-deep water and smoke. They hit the trench line hard, clearing it with bolter and blade. One cultist lunged out of the muck, his face painted with ash and blood. Heka's trident took him clean through the chest, pinning him to the embankment. Another cultist hurled a satchel charge before dying, the explosive tumbling end over end through the rain. It landed just behind Brother Marrow. The detonation swallowed him in light and thunder. The blast hurled the Astartes 10 meters through the air, armor shrieking as shockwaves tore through ceramite and adamantine. He struck the ground hard, the impact sending a crack like splitting stone across the causeway. When the smoke cleared, he lay motionless. Armor blackened, plates warped and split along the seams, steam hissing from ruptured cooling vents. His trident lay a few meters away, half scorched, its half bent and blackened where the fire had kissed it. Vaikato noted Marrow's rune turned dark in his helm display and marked the position for gene seed retrieval. The squad pressed on. The final resistance broke within minutes, the cultists dissolving into panic as bolter fire scythed through them. The smell of burned flesh and promethium hung thick in the humid air. By the time the junction was theirs, the light was fading. The road was choked with corpses and wreckage, smoke rising from the shattered guns. 2 predators burned in the ditches, their crews dead inside. The Hestians had lost 3 more carriers and dozens of men. Vaikato stood at the center of the junction, trident buried in the mud. The storm had slackened to a drizzle, though thunder still rolled across the horizon. Engineers worked under floodlight to repair the causeway decking. Guardsmen dug fighting positions along the verges, setting up heavy bolters and stringing wire. Tech Marines moved among the armor, hammering plates straight and whispering litanies to calm machine spirits still hot from battle. Koata keyed the company net, his voice heavy but unyielding. "We do not measure victory by how far we march, but by who marches with us when we stop. Tonight we count our dead, and tomorrow we take the price back with blood. Sleep if you can, reload if you cannot. At dawn we strike for the city." Vaikato rested with his squad, tridents planted in the mud like grave markers. The air smelled of smoke and wet iron. "They'll throw more at us tomorrow," Heka said quietly. Vaikato was silent for a long moment, then said simply, "Let them come." The first shells fell at dawn. They came down like falling stars, smashing into the outskirts of Kaunongan city and flattening an entire row of habs. Dust and glass filled the air in a choking haze. The ground trembled underfoot. Brother Sergeant Vaikato stood in the middle of the rubble-choked street, storm bolter raised, trident haft resting against his thigh. His helm lenses glowed a steady teal in the smoke. All around him, the 117th Hestian Amphibious Rifles crouched behind craters and shattered walls, laser guns ready, knuckles white on their grips. The rain had not let up. It turned the dust to slurry and plastered it against the guardsmen's faces, streaking down like war paint. The Vox crackled. Captain Koata's voice came through, calm as the tide. "Third company," he said. "Advance, clear the streets. The vigil is today's prize." Vaikato keyed his mic. "Understood." He glanced at the guardsmen to his left, their captain among them. "Move on my mark." The first intersection was theirs within minutes. Frag grenades cleared the alleys, and Hestian fire teams leapfrogged forward, bounding by pairs, one firing, the other moving. Smoke grenades turned the next street into a grey wall, and the column pushed through into the teeth of a hidden gun nest. Heavy stubber fire tore through the mist, stitching sparks from the hull of the lead carrier. The second vehicle took a direct hit from a rocket and brewed up instantly, flames venting from the hatches. Men screamed as they threw themselves clear, some still on fire. "Suppress that nest!" Vaikato barked, swinging his stormbolter onto the muzzle flash. His shells chewed through the window frame, blowing chunks of ferrocrete into the defenders inside. The guardsmen recovered quickly. Two vaulted into a doorway and began clearing the building room by room, their las fire snapping fast and precise. The stench of burnt propellant and cooked flesh filled the air. When the street was quiet again, medics moved in, dragging the worst cases to the casualty collection point. Others were laid in neat rows along the curb, rifles crossed over their chests. "This one won't make it," a medic muttered, crouching over a mortally burned trooper. The priest beside him nodded and drew his las pistol. "The Emperor sees you, son. Look to him." The shot was soft, almost merciful against the chaos outside. By mid-morning, the battle had become a block-by-block grind. Basilisks fired short, brutal missions by grid reference, walking their shells forward as the infantry advanced. Hestian carriers leapfrogged intersection to intersection, forming ad hoc fire bases. Tech priests scuttled under fire to patch track damage or strip ammunition from wrecks before they cooked off. Vaikato's squad moved parallel to the main push, clearing side streets and choke points. At one junction, they found a fortified hab. "Stack left," Vaikato ordered. Heki, pale but determined, ribs still bound from the causeway fight, lobbed a frag through the window. The blast shook the wall. Vaikato was through the door a heartbeat later, stormbolter barking. They cleared the rooms with brutal precision, their tridents smashing barricades and dragging the last defender from under a table. "Street's yours," Vaikato told the guardsmen as they surged past. "Don't lose it." The cost climbed with every block. 2 basilisks were knocked out by hidden autocannons. 3 carriers burned within the first hour. A whole Hestian platoon was lost clearing a barricaded plaza, leaving their dead in heaps until the street could be taken. Even the spears bled. A Thunderhawk carrying an assault squad was struck by a shoulder-fired missile while flaring over an intersection. It went down hard, clipping a hab block before exploding in a blossom of fire. "Strike 2-7 down," came the clipped report. Koata's voice was steady, almost ritualistic. "Secure the site, recover their gene seed, no brother is left behind." Vaikato's squad reached the wreck within minutes, fighting through a dozen cultists trying to loot the crash site. The Astartes bodies were laid out with care, progenoids removed under fire and sealed into reliquaries before the advance continued. By noon, the push slowed to a crawl. The cultists fought from basements and upper stories, sniping at every exposed angle. Improvised mines turned alleys into death traps. Vaikato's squad breached a wall with melter charges rather than risk the front door, storming through a cloud of plaster dust into a room already laced with tripwires. "They're learning," Hickey growled, snapping a wire with the haft of his trident. "Not fast enough," Vaikato replied grimly. Predators rolled forward, their autocannons hammering until the upper floors collapsed in a rain of rubble. Hestians followed, clearing survivors with bayonets and lass fire. Private Raukawa of the 117th crouched in the doorway of a ruined hab, pulse hammering as the building across the street disintegrated under predator fire. Dust rained from the ceiling, coating his laser gun white. He could hear the Astartes before he saw them. The slow, deliberate tread of armored boots, the hiss of rebreathers. One passed the doorway, black as midnight, trident raised. Raukawa's fear drained away, replaced by something like shame. He rose and followed, shouting to his fire team to move. If the giants weren't afraid, neither would he be. By mid-afternoon, the outer districts were theirs. The streets ahead were eerily quiet, the air heavy with smoke and dust. Then it began. A sound rolled through the streets, low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat amplified 100-fold. The haka of 3rd Company. It came from every direction at once, deep voices shouting in perfect unison, feet stamping, weapons striking against armor. The sound echoed through the city like a storm tide. Hestians froze where they stood, hair rising on their arms. Even the wounded turned their heads to listen. Something primal in the sound steadied them. For a moment, even the rain seemed to pause. Inside the vigil, cultists broke discipline, firing wildly into the dusk. Some fled outright, abandoning their posts. The shouts rolled on and on until they seemed to shake the very stones, then cut off in perfect silence. The attack struck like thunder. Thunderhawks came in low, disgorging Astartes squads into the outer courtyards. Predators and land raiders rumbled forward in a wedge, lascannons and sponson fire smashing the gatehouse weapons. 3rd Company, Koata voxed, his tone measured but sharp as a spear tip. Gatehouse first, breach and clear. Melter charges cut the gates apart. Vaikato led the way through as the metal fell inward, Stormbolter hammering. Brother Wero was caught by a missile as they breached the inner hall. The blast hurled him against the wall, armor cracked and life signs flatlining on the HUD. Vaikato dropped to one knee beside him, steady hands working under fire as the progenoids were cut free and sealed in a reliquary. Then he rose, passing the tube to a waiting brother and pressing forward, leaving Wero's body in the smoking hall with a silent promise it would be retrieved. Room by room, the vigil was purged. Frag grenades went in first, followed by Astartes in a storm of ceramite and fire. Barricades were ripped down with tridents, defenders cut apart with bolter shells. A predator's track was sheared away by a direct hit, locking it in place amid the churned rubble. Smoke vented from its hull as sparks cascaded down the glacis, but its guns did not fall silent. The crew fought on, their lascannons and heavy bolters hammering at the gatehouse until the barrels glowed red. Every burst tore chunks from the enemy's defenses, sending showers of stone and flesh into the air. Through the rain and the storm of debris, the Obsidian Spears advanced past the stricken vehicle in perfect formation. Vaikato glanced once toward the burning tank as it continued to fire, even as its ammunition ran dry. The final bursts echoed like drumbeats, defiant and unbroken. When the last shell casing clattered against the ruined street, the spears moved through the smoke it had made for them, carrying the battle forward while the predator burned behind them. At the heart of the vigil lay the corrupted forge, still belching warp flame. Koata advanced at the head of his company, helm lenses glowing in the firelight. Chaplains raised their croziuses, intoning litanies as squads formed a ring around the forge. "Cleanse it," Koata said simply. Promethium roared from the nozzles of heavy flamers. The warp fire screamed as it was drowned, guttering and dying. Blessed oils were poured over the altar, and salt scattered until the place reeked of sanctity. When the flames were gone, the chapter banner was planted in the stone floor. The vigil was theirs. Far above, the Tides Eternal was silent, but for the hum of her engines. Aranga Moana watched the last picked feed from the surface, the chapter's standard snapping in the wind above the vigil. He rested his trident on the deck plates and spoke into the command vox. "Kaunonga is cleansed. Signal to all companies. Reform, rearm, and redeploy. The current carries us to the next island." He turned back to the hololith, watching the storm-racked planet below. The war was not done, but this battle was finished, and the tide was with them. The night sea was black and restless, flecked with the ghost light of tracers arcing high above the shore. Beneath that restless sky, hundreds of Hestian landing craft ploughed eastward in formation. Engines roared, wakes churned white, and the soldiers inside clutched rifles slick with seawater. Their sergeants whispered last checks, their priests held icons high against the salt wind, and the green glow of Auspex screens flickered across tight jaws. The shore ahead was invisible beyond the surf and darkness, but its presence was undeniable. The artillery flashes on the horizon lit it for seconds at a time, carving black ridges out of the night like teeth waiting to close. On one carrier, Corporal Holden gripped the gunwale until his knuckles whitened. The sea chops slammed his stomach up into his throat, and he swallowed hard against the bile. Beside him, Private Leahy laughed. "Not even on the beach yet, and you're half dead," Leahy said. "The Emperor will give you back your legs once we land." "Not if the sea kills me first," Holden muttered, then made the sign of the Aquila quickly, eyes darting upward. The ecclesiarchy preacher aboard caught the motion and leaned in, his voice just audible over the roar of engines. "The sea does not kill you tonight, boy. It carries you." Holden wanted to believe him. He closed his eyes and touched the seashell charm sewn into his sleeve, its edges worn smooth by years of worry. His sister had pressed it into his hand at embarkation, laughing through tears. "For luck, you fool." He mouthed the old prayer his mother had spoken in storms, the words catching in his throat. He imagined the breakers ahead, black water dragging him down before he even saw the enemy. The thought was worse than bullets. He bowed his head lower and prayed the sea would carry him as the priest promised, not claim him. Far above, the Tides Eternal and her escorts laid down bombardment. Lances struck the coast with pinpoint accuracy, erasing heavy gun pits and trenchworks. Macro shells howled through the upper atmosphere, hammering the bluffs in thunderous detonations that shook the sea. In the hangar bay, Captain Koata watched the fire map update in cold blue-green. Each icon winked out under bombardment until only a jagged line of red remained. "Target grid is open," the augur officer said. Koata's helm tilted toward his assembled strike force. Assault marines lined the deck, packs hissing, tridents and bolters primed. At the far end, Vaikato checked the seals on his squad's harness, teal lenses hard with focus. Koata's voice rolled over the bay like surf. "From sky and sea we fall, 3rd Company, strike." Beneath the surface, deeper still, the ocean boiled with hidden fury. Vanguard Marines and Scouts rode submersible capsules and sealed transports, hulls slick with salt crust and algae. The vessels drifted to a halt half a kilometer from shore, ballast hatches opening. "Cut ballast, ready ascent." Speech meant nothing here. In the deep, only the slow press of limbs and the dim gleam of lenses marked resolve. Black-armored giants climbed from the depths, their armor scarred white by salt, kelp strands fluttering like votive ribbons from their packs. Barnacle crust clung to greaves, a mark of old campaigns beneath stranger seas. They rose toward the fire-lit coast in silence, weapons clenched and blades sheathed across their backs. The first thunder came not from guns but from wings. Assault squads launched in a storm of roar and light, jump packs howling, contrails streaking as they knifed down through the night. Tracers reached up to meet them, but the spears fell too fast. The first of them hit like lightning, slamming into trenches and firing pits with bolters roaring point blank. One squad overshot, torn apart by flak bursts mid-descent. They fell burning into the surf, becoming streaks of orange-white swallowed by waves. The survivors landed hard, scattering defenders in sprays of gore, tridents punching through armor and bodies. Vaikato's squad smashed into the main trench line, storm bolters hammering into shocked cultists. He swung his trident in a great arc, the blade biting into a gunner's chest and tearing him in two. "Clear the trench," he barked. His brothers moved like a tide, methodical and merciless, flushing the dugouts with grenades, cutting down survivors with controlled bursts. At the same time, the ocean gave up its warriors. The vanguard broke the surface in silence, black shapes rising amid the surf like revenants. Knives and carbines flashed in the dark as they slithered up seawalls and broke into the rear of enemy positions. Scouts followed, bursting from the foam with muffled bolter fire, picking off machine gun crews before they realized they were flanked. One team knifed their way through a comms dugout, cutting throats and smashing vox sets before the alarm could sound. When the trench garrison looked up from the sky to the shore, it was already too late. The spears were inside their lines, moving with tidal certainty. Chaos spread through the vox nets of the heretic defenders, screams of angels from above, and they're in the surf, they're behind us, filled the bands, cutting across one another in panic. Officers tried to restore order, but every command was swallowed in static and fear. One bunker crew swung their guns upward, hammering the sky, only to be torn apart from behind as a vanguard squad breached their rear hatch. Another trench section fought desperately, holding Vaikato's squad at bay with autocannon fire, until a Thunderhawk roared overhead and obliterated the position with a strafing run. And then, amid the screaming bands came a new voice, harsh, steady, commanding. "Second line, hold! Fire by grid, fire by grid!" Under that iron tone, the heretics fought like soldiers, not rabble. Heavy autocannons pivoted, their salvos disciplined, and for a moment the trench line roared with unity. One assault squad was caught mid-drop. 3 brothers ripped apart in bursts of fire before they touched ground. The survivors slammed into the earth hard and bloody. Charge staggered, momentum stolen. Vaikato felt it at once. A reef catching the keel, a drag on the tide. He keyed his vox. "On me, cut the head." His squad surged forward, storm bolters shredding the gun crews, tridents breaking the rallied line. When the commander's voice finally cut short, silenced by a blade across his throat, the fight dissolved into chaos again. But the cost had been real. Brother Rere was caught mid-leap by a rocket and torn in half before he hit the ground. His brothers fought past his corpse, carving a path into the trench, but Vaikato's HUD marked the loss with a sharp rune. Another squad, pinned too deep in the surf, was hammered by mortars, their bodies dragged down into the undertow, armor weighing them into blackness. Only 3 emerged, coughing seawater through damaged rebreathers, bolters still clenched in their fists. Koata landed in the heart of the trench system, Crozius crackling in his fist, his vox carrying above the roar. "Forward, brothers! Light the shore for the Emperor's wrath." At his signal, Flares fired skyward from captured trench lines. Green fire burned in arcs above the surf, painting targets for the guns above. Seconds later, the tide's eternal shifted fire, macro shells walking inland to hammer the second defensive line. For the first time that night, the bluffs shook not with defiance but with collapse. And still the Black Sea boiled. Out on the horizon, the Hestian landing craft ploughed forward, engines redlining, waves hammering their prows. Their men clutched rifles and crossed themselves, hearing the roar of battle ahead, but seeing only fire and surf. Between them and the shore, the spears carved footholds in trench and seawall, bleeding for every meter. Above, Thunderhawks screamed in and out of the dark, their guns raking the bluff. Beneath, vanguards still cut their way into gun nests and artillery pits, their vox calls curt and efficient. And waiting below the surface, deeper still, ancient forms stirred. Tahu's vox crackled, grating and sardonic as always. Time to stretch these legs, brothers. Let's see if Kaunongan remembers what walks out of its sea. Dawn crawled out of the east, painting the ocean grey. The Hestian flotilla surged forward, 1,000 prows punching through the swell, their wakes fanning white. Amphibious carriers, low-slung gun barges, stubby-nosed landing boats, all packed with men. The roar of their engines was drowned by the shore itself. The bluffs vomited fire, mortars thumped, rockets screamed, heavy stubbers beat a constant tattoo. The sea erupted in geysers of spray as shells bracketed the approach lanes. Corporal Holden clenched his seashell charm so hard it cut into his palm. He could see nothing but walls of water, orange flashes on the ridges, and men vomiting over the sides. The priest had gone quiet. Leahy was shouting something about the Emperor, but Holden's ears rang too hard to hear it. The first boat in the line ahead vanished in a column of white and fire. Bits of it and its occupants rained down across the waves. The ramps dropped and hell came with them. Hestians poured into the surf, rifles high, stumbling forward into waist-deep water. Mortar rounds churned the tide into froth, tearing men apart in sprays of red. Officers blew whistles and waved, herding squads toward the sea walls. Stubbers stitched the surf, cutting lines of men in half. A landing barge ran aground on a mine. Its bow flipped, spilling 30 soldiers into the undertow. Armor dragged them down. Only a handful surfaced, flailing. Holden saw their helmets bob once, twice, then sink. He thought of his sister's seashell. The priest beside him leapt into the water. Icon held high, voice ragged as he bellowed litanies. The men followed, screaming prayers and curses alike. Holden forced his boots into the sand. The breakers hit him like fists, but he ran anyway. Above the din, calm voices cut through on the Vox. Assault squads and vanguard teams already dug into trench junctions relayed coordinates. Fire mission grid 137, heavy emplacement on the bluff. Copy, Basilisk, 3 rounds, splash in 10. The ground shook as Imperial artillery answered, shells tearing into the bluffs in perfect sequence. Thunderhawks swept low, autocannons chewing bunkers apart. A squad of spears marked a gun pit with green smoke. Seconds later, a storm eagle erased it in a tongue of fire. Where the Hestians wavered, the spear's steady hand pulled them forward. The black giants moved like anchors in the surf, directing fire, hauling men upright, pointing them toward the sea walls. Reaching the bluffs was no reprieve. The sea walls loomed slick with algae, ladders shattered by shellfire. Hestians clawed their way up with bare hands, bayonets and ropes. Defenders hurled grenades down. Men fell screaming into the surf below. Vaikato led his squad in a bounding leap up the wall, jump packs roaring, landing among the defenders like thunder. His trident punched through a gunner's chest. Stormbolter fire tore a path clear. Up, he barked, and the mortals obeyed. The water boiled, swelled, and broke. From the depths came ancient warriors, each step shaking the surf. Dreadnoughts, black hulks crowned in salt crust and barnacles, their sarcophagi glowing with runes. Tahu led, his form scarred and immense, the sea foaming at his knees. A heavy flamer roared from his arm, washing bunkers in liquid fire. Bolters spat from his hull, cutting trenches into ribbons. His vox crackled, sardonic as ever. "You'll need stronger chains than this shore. I've walked worse beaches." The men who heard it, mortal and Astartes alike, laughed through their fear. Even Holden felt his lips twitch, though he was caked in mud and blood. Another dreadnought strode beside Tahu, its power fist hammering seawalls flat. The third raised its assault cannon and shredded a pillbox until only dust and meat remained. Shells struck their hulls and sparked off ceramite. The dreadnoughts did not slow. But not all the defenders broke. On a rocky spur above the central landing zone, a heretic commander planted his boots and bellowed orders. His voice rasped through a stolen vox horn, guttural yet steady. Around him clustered scarred men with the look of veterans, PDF officers turned cult leaders. They manned heavy stubbers with grim precision, cut down advancing Hestians in disciplined bursts, and lobbed satchels into the surf with practiced arcs. One of them braced a recoilless launcher on his shoulder and fired point-blank into a chimera disgorged from its landing craft. The blast peeled its flank open. The crew died screaming as fire consumed them. "Hold the line," the commander roared, raising a blood-smeared blade. "The sea takes them." For a moment, the cultists believed him. They fought not as a mob but as soldiers, holding the bluff with fanatic resolve. It took a coordinated strike, Vaikato's squad bounding uphill, Tahu's flamer washing the spur, basilisk shells hammering the ridge, to break them. When the commander finally fell, trident through his chest, he spat blood and laughter into Vaikato's faceplate. "The tide will turn." Then he was gone, and his knot of fighters with him. The heretics did not collapse cleanly. Whips cracked, voices screamed, and waves of cultists were driven forward, their eyes wild. They poured down from the bluffs into the surf, trampling their own dead, charging into the landing craft, still disgorging men. Holden saw them coming. He fired until his laser clicked dry, then bayoneted the first man over the gunwale. Leahy screamed beside him, stabbing with a trench knife. Then the spears arrived. Assault marines dropped into the melee, tridents and blades carving space for the Hestians to regroup. The water ran red with salt and blood, breakers turning pink as they smashed against the landing boats. One cultist leapt onto Tahu's hull, screaming, chainblade raised. The dreadnought swatted him aside with contempt, sending him cartwheeling into the surf. "Behave yourself," Tahu muttered over the vox. The countercharge was a wave that rose too high and broke. Foam, wreckage, and corpses were all that remained. The beachhead became a furnace. Mortars rained. Basilisks fired blind over the surf. Thunderhawks strafed until their guns overheated. The Hestians clawed into every hollow, sandbags rising by the dozen, heavy weapons planted in blood-slick mud. Predators came down on gravslings, landing hard in the surf and rolling forward with sponsons blazing. One was struck by a mine and flipped, its crew lost. The others pressed inland, turrets raking strongpoints. Grid 154, Vaikato voxed. Fire for effect. A basilisk battery obliged, collapsing a bunker in a roar of dust. Hestians surged through the breach, rifles hammering, flamers spitting fire. The heretics wavered, then finally they broke. The cost had been brutal. Casualty stations formed on the sand itself, tarps stretched between burned-out carriers. Medici worked in mud up to their knees, cutting and stitching in the open air. Priests moved among the rows, whispering last rites, granting the emperor's peace where needed. Holden sat in a shallow crater, seashell charm still in his fist, blood pouring from a cut across his scalp. Leahy crouched beside him, face black with powder smoke. "Still alive?" Leahy rasped. "Still alive," Holden answered, though he wasn't sure how. By noon, the bluffs were theirs. The last bunkers burned, their crews either dead or fleeing inland. Hestian banners were planted in wet sand, tridents raised above the seawall in triumph. The spears regrouped, armor scarred, brothers missing. One assault squad had been halved, another had only 3 survivors. Several were so badly wounded that they were to be interred in a sarcophagus, to be entombed within a dreadnought. Vaikato knelt briefly beside Brother Rare's reliquary tube, before passing it to a waiting apothecary. Tahu stood in the surf, seawater lapping at his shins, black smoke curling from his heavy flamer. His vox crackled. "Beachhead secure. You mortals dig your holes, we'll keep the tide off." Koata walked the bluff as the sun climbed. Below him the sea was red, filled with wreckage and bodies, mortal and heretic alike. The air reeked of cordite, blood and burning oil. Vaikato joined him, helm tucked under one arm, his face hard with resolve. "The Hestians will hold it," he said. "They must," Koata replied. He looked inland where black smoke rose from the hills. "The sea gives nothing back. Every meter inland will be won the same way." Above, the tide's eternal shifted its orbit, lance batteries already turning toward the next target. By dusk, the beachhead was secure. Trenches were dug, artillery rolled forward. Landing craft cycled back and forth to fill the growing supply dumps. The Hestians dug in like barnacles clinging to rock, their lines already bristling with sandbags and wire. Fighting patrols by both the Hestians and the scouts of the Obsidian Spears were already probing ahead of the line, harrying the enemy as they withdrew inland. The Spears stood among them, silent giants blackened with soot and salt, watching the horizon. To the enemy, they were no longer men, but the undertow, inevitable, unseen until it dragged you down. High above, Chapter Master Aranga Moana received the report. He stood at the viewing dais, watching the scarred coast gleam red in the fading light. "Kaunongan remembers us," he murmured. "Signal all companies, the tide carries us inland." The war was far from over, but the black shore was theirs. Dawn broke grey and sullen over Kaunonga's bluffs. The sea behind the Imperials was red with fuel and blood, but the banners of the Hestian Amphibious Rifles still stood in the sand, planted like barnacles on rock. Men moved among the wreckage like ants upon a drowned corpse. Some hauled wire, others dug in fresh gun pits, and more carried the broken on stretchers toward the surf where hospital boats waited. The dead lay in lines beneath canvas, rifles driven into the sand to mark their resting places until burial could be afforded. Now the push inland began. Columns of men and armor ground their way up from the beachhead, treads biting into mud still slick with yesterday's gore. Engineers laid pontoons across gullies and repaired shattered causeways with planks and prayer, their tools rattling in weary hands. Artillery batteries crawled forward behind tractors, the great basilisks groaning as they were dragged up inclines made treacherous by rain. Casualty trains moved the other way, carts and carriers heaped with the broken. The silence of their passage was more haunting than the roar of the guns. Vaikato strode ahead of Third Squad, helm lenses sweeping the tree line. Behind him, Hestian platoons trudged in close file, laser guns on shoulders, faces pale with exhaustion. They looked to the black giants who walked in their midst, and drew something from the sight, though none dared speak it. Koata's voice reached them over the squad net, low and certain. "We are dragging the sea across stone," he said. "Every step resists us." The enemy was not broken. Every mile inland brought another ambush, another pre-sighted kill zone. A half-burned hamlet became a fortress, its alleys lined with firing holes. A chapel gutted of its altar turned into a kill box, its upper floor collapsing in a roar of dust and fire when a platoon pressed too deep. Hestians bled for every block. A convoy of carriers rolled into a crossfire one afternoon, rockets streaking from both flanks. By the time the spears reached the scene, 2 vehicles were burning and men were scattering through the fields like prey animals flushed from cover. Scouts reported minefields seeded by hand in the night, and culverts rigged to collapse into advancing columns. In the ruins of a village, prisoners were chained across the street, their screams echoing as defenders fired from behind them. Tehoka spat when he saw it. "They choke us with their own dead." At the crossroads where 2 platoons lay pinned, the spears did not simply charge. They moved like reef hunters, each brother covering the other's advance, storm bolters cracking in disciplined bursts. One vaulted a barricade and drove his trident haft into a gunner's throat. Another placed fire precisely into firing slits, pinning defenders so comrades could cross. Vaikato rammed his weapon like a spear through a mortared seam and levered the wall wide enough for the squad to pour through. A brother hooked a trident tine behind a bunker shield and wrenched, exposing a muzzle just long enough for a single surgical burst. The strongpoint didn't fall in chaos. It was dismantled piece by piece until the last heretic inside broke and ran. The Hestians who followed in their wake saw not just power but precision, war as an art carved into living stone. Still, the defenders fought with an intensity beyond desperation. They did not shriek only in fear but in devotion. Their voices carried a rhythm, as though bound to something greater than themselves. Corporal Holden felt it too. He trudged with his platoon through the muck, seashell charm still tied to his sleeve, worn smooth by anxious fingers. Around him the men moved in silence, broken only by muttered prayers or the clatter of kit. Leahy limped beside him, jaw clenched. "Feels like the whole island's a trap," Leahy muttered. "It is," Holden answered. His voice sounded older than it had the day before. They halted at a culvert mouth. Scouts had marked tripwires. Engineers moved forward to cut them, hands steady despite the rain. Holden stared into the black hollow and thought of sea caves back home, where children dared one another to go deeper until the tide came rushing in. He felt the same dread now, the sense of something waiting to drown them. The heretics fought with more than bullets. Voxcasters hidden in ruins whispered blasphemy over imperial bans, promising the emperor's abandonment. Distorted chants rose from corpse piles wired with speakers, turning night into a dirge. Leaflets fluttered across the fields, icons daubed in blood, disturbingly close to runes of the sea. Koata crushed one beneath his boot. "Words are foam," he said. "The tide is iron." Even so, the spears took wounds of their own. A predator was gutted by a hidden gun slit, its turret sheared clean. The crew died inside, tech marines marking the wreck with runes in silence. An assault squad was swallowed whole when a manufactorum roof, pre-cut and propped, collapsed under them. Their Vox signals went dead between one heartbeat and the next. Another squad fought through a strongpoint and emerged with half its number, armor dripping gore. On the 3rd night, the enemy struck back. Dusk bled into dark as Hestians dug into a shallow valley, the air damp and cold. Mortars fell in rippling brackets, sowing confusion, and then the earth split. Tunnels vomited cultists by the hundred, screaming, blades flashing. From the woods on both flanks, rockets streaked down, and the valley floor became a killing ground. Holden's platoon took the first blow. Men screamed and fell as shapes surged out of the smoke. Halden fired until his shoulder bruised, then dragged Leahy upright as a blade hissed past. The world narrowed to muzzle flashes and wet breath, and the stink of bodies pressing close. A figure vaulted the wire, grey coat, rusted cleaver high, and charged straight for the Medicae line where the wounded lay exposed. Halden didn't think. He stepped into the swing, smashed the butt of his laser gun into the man's jaw, felt bone give, and fired a point-blank shot that blew the heretic backward into the mud. For a heartbeat, he stood blinking at the corpse, breath ragged. The Medicae stared at him as if surprised he still stood. Halden spat blood and shouted over his shoulder, voice raw but steady. "Hold the line! The Emperor protects!" It wasn't clever or loud, but the men nearby straightened. A loader shoved a fresh power pack home with a snarl. Another soldier braced his bayonet and set his feet. It was enough to stiffen a thinning thread. At the rear, basilisks fired danger close, barrels glowing red, while mortars turned on mobs only 50 meters away. Gunners dropped tools and fired laser guns over sandbags as cultists poured through gaps in the wire. Koata arrived with a demi-squad, his sword crackling as he smashed into the press, his men forming a wall of black ceramite around the guns. "Hold them," he roared. "The reef does not break." Through the chaos came Tahu. The dreadnought trudged through mud, hull pitted with rocket scars, heavy flamer roaring in arcs that turned men to ash. His power fist closed on bodies like driftwood, crushing them to pulp. A rocket slammed into his torso, staggering him. His vox rumbled, sardonic even now. That tickled. His assault cannon thundered in reply, shredding the launcher crew to mist. The counterattack faltered. The line reformed behind the ceramite giants, Hestians rallying in disciplined volleys. The cultists broke against them like surf against cliff. The valley was saved, though it stank of blood and smoke. When silence finally fell, the ground was carpeted with corpses. Fires smoldered in the woods, the smoke choking. Medicae worked in mud up to their knees. Priests walked among the dying with bolt pistols in hand. Halden sat with Lehi, both men shaking, too tired to speak. He could still feel the jolt of the cleaver's impact in his arms. The seashell charm dug into his palm, and for the first time since landfall, he realized he wasn't merely hoping to survive. He wanted the thing at the heart of this island broken. "Let me see it ended," he prayed. Not only to endure, but to end. Vaikato climbed a ridge and stared at the dark beyond. "They are not spent," he said. Koata stood beside him, helm tucked under one arm. "No, they are drawing us in." The proof came soon after. In the black of morning, a prisoner was dragged from the ruins of a bunker, his wrists bound in bloody wire. He was gaunt, eyes fever-bright, lips torn by chanting. Unlike others, he did not spit curses when seized. Instead, he smiled, and his words came with a chilling clarity. "They wait at the heart," he rasped. "The Manufactorum 3 East. It is his altar now. The Bellmaster waits, our voice, our hand, the one who rang the vigil's silence. At dusk the bell will toll, iron and bone. When it rings, the sky will open. The storm will come down, and you will never leave this world." He began to laugh, high and broken, until a bolt round silenced it. The echo carried through the valley like a bad omen. Silence lingered after the shot, the hush of men and giants measuring a new horizon. Even the smoke seemed to hang heavy, as though listening for echoes of the prisoner's last laughter. Vaikato's grip tightened on his trident. If that bell tolls, Kaunongan becomes a coffin, not just for them, for us. Koata looked out over the valley, jaw set hard. A warp beacon. A storm drawn down by blasphemy. The fleet will be shackled, the world drowned in madness. We have ours, no more. A vox link crackled, and Chapter Master Aranga Moana's voice came cold from orbit, steady as deep water. "You have your reef," he said. "Break it before it breaks us. All strength is yours, Third Company. The chapter stands behind you." Halden stood in the shadow of ceramite and iron, the seashell pressed tight in his palm. He thought of the sea back home, merciless, but at least something a man could understand, and tried to imagine a storm fierce enough to tear open the sky itself. Fear slid under his ribs like cold water, but something harder settled over it, sharp and simple. "Let me see it ended," he whispered again. Not to any ship or distant figure, but to the mud beneath his boots, to the wounded behind him, to whatever might hear a soldier's last stubborn hope. He rose, checked his laser gun with stiff fingers and nudged Leahy with a weary boot. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's go. We're going to finish this." Koata turned from the ridge, helm settling back over his features. His voice carried across the net, calm as tidewater over stone. "Full commit. Third Company to the breach. Hestians encircle and hold. We strike before the bell tolls. The reef is before us." Engines coughed and caught. Artillery crews hauled guns into new lines by main strength. Thunderhawks screamed low, bellies heavy with warriors. The last reef had risen, and it had to be broken before nightfall. The floodlight swung east as the army turned. Engines throbbed. Tracks chattered on plates and planks. The air smelled of wet iron and spent propellant. Overhead, Thunderhawks cut low, their shadows sliding across the ruined fields like fast clouds. Storm Eagles orbited farther out, hunting for mobile guns with patient sweeps of auspex and the long, searching stare of autocannons. Vaikato checked his brothers down the line. Tridents locked to mag clamps, fresh drums on storm bolters, melter and crack charges set where they belonged. Across the company net, Koata's voice was steady as groundswells. "Third Company, this is a spearhead. Hestians encircle and hold. Predators on the spine roads, whirlwinds counter mortar and interdict. Tech Marines, you are the hinge. Hold the feeds and we hold the hour. We move." They moved. The Manufactorum at Grid 3 East rose out of the mist like a black reef. Low sheds of riveted iron, towers spined with catwalks, chimneys that breathed a faint, sour heat. The nearer the force drew, the more the air seemed to press against the tongue. Not sound, a pressure behind the teeth. It set a rhythm under the heart like a second pulse. The corrupted bell had not tolled, but it was already listening. Scouts had cut the wire in 3 places, and Hestian platoons poured through, spreading like oil across the outer yards. Predators ground forward, nose to nose, sponsons ticking, muzzles hunting the dark. The first shots came from vents, disciplined bursts, not panicked. A machine gun slapped a half-section to ground. A shaped charge scissored a track. The defenders fought in teams, fell back by lane, covered one another cleanly. The enemy's hand was steady. Bellmaster's drill, Vaikato thought, and cut the channel. Breach teams, go. Third Company came on like a storm. 2 squads mounted the outer wall with jetpacks. A third punched straight through a service door. Melter at hinge, crack on the lock, trident blades driving the panel in with a shriek. Inside, a catwalk T-boned a tangle of ducting. Vaikato's point man took a knee, called arcs, and the squad flowed around him like water around rock. 1 high on the rail, 1 low under the ducts, 2 covering the blind corner. The first defender stepped into the fatal triangle and took a double tap to the visor. The second was yanked forward by a trident tine, hooked through his gorget, and finished with a point-blank burst that painted the ductwork black. "Left bay clear," came the report. "Right bay, 2 contacts moving." The ceiling above the right bay sagged. Pre-cut columns gave at once. A slab the size of a hab room slammed down. The brother beneath it rolled with inhuman speed, came up snarling. The shockwave nonetheless knocked 2 Hestians flat and ripped a Vox aerial into sparks. "Pre-cut," Vaikato voxed. "Expect engineered collapses, 2-level clearance, move in pairs." They advanced in short bounds, bursts stitched door frames. Tridents were levers as often as weapons, hook, wrench, pin, then the clean kill. On a boxed stairwell, a defender waited with a satchel charge on a corded toggle. A brother smashed the toggle hand with a butt stroke, but the charge went off out of sequence anyway, blowing plaster and 2 retreating figures into a messy cloud. The squad took it as a drumbeat. No pause, no anger, just onward motion. Outside, the encirclement set its teeth. The Hestians went to earth along the Manufactorum's berms and made themselves a ring of iron. Heavy teams dug guns into sandbag embrasures while engineers cut new lanes through the outer fence. Counter-battery came in fast. Whirlwinds answered, mapping the enemy fire by impact and walking rockets back along suspected mortar lines. A transport full of ammunition cooked off behind the second line and painted the sky with a yellow flower. The ring wavered, then set itself harder. "Maintain arcs," a Hestian captain barked over company net. "No gaps. If they push out, we hold them." "They'll try," Holden muttered, settling his rifle and breathing around the flutter in his chest. Leahy lay beside him, bandage grimy, jaw set. The seashell charm dug into Holden's palm like a thorn. "Let me see it ended," he told the windless air. Deep inside, the bell's pressure grew. It wasn't audible. It was felt. The Manufactorum was a throat, and something within it had drawn breath. Koata's squad hit the first of the machine halls at a run. Light strobed. Ladders crisscrossed to gantries where gunners had sandbagged firing nests above conveyor beds. 3-point enfilade, Koata said, and his men took the angles by reflex, 2 to the long run, 1 up, 1 down. The first burst scythed the nearest nest. The second walked across the gun shields and cut the loader as he reached for a drum. A defender sprang from shadow with a hooked blade. Koata's Crozius took him in the hip and tore him apart like damp paper. The air tasted of hot oil and iron. Tech Marines were already at work, surgeons in a burning hospital. One clamped a valve with 3 mechadendrites while another drove a cap, a third daubing sacrament resin as his vox cant filled the space his lungs did not. Every pipe they sealed damped the pressure a hair. Every manifold they closed drew a snarl from deeper in the works, as if the bell resented being denied its voice. "Secondary feeds at blue 6, green 3, orange 1, a Tech Marine voxed, runes scrolling. "Cut them or the main line will back pressure. If it back pressures, this hall is a bomb." "Understood," Koata said. "Third squad with me, Vaikato drive the center, we meet at the bell." "Moving," Vaikato replied. They found the bellmaster's work before they found the bellmaster. A corridor painted with sigils meant not for reading but for feeling. The paint was mixed with ash and iron filings. The floor gritted underfoot. A hair hung in the air in that place. A prickle gathered at the roots of the teeth. At the far end, double doors stood ajar, and the hum was unmistakable, not sound but resonance like a plucked cable running through bone. "Left open," Vaikato said. "Hook and step." They went. The bell chamber was not a cathedral. It was worse because it pretended at function. A great iron casting hung from a gantry crane, its skin greasy with oil, its lips stitched in scrap plates, embossed with tooth and nail and coin. The clapper was a mass of welded rebar and chain, and on its bolted face, someone had embedded a mask of beaten brass, featureless, save for a slit where a mouth might be. Lines ran everywhere, fuel, air, power, turned from sensible routes into ritual paths like a river tricked by gates and dams. Men moved along the gantries, veterans in scavenged plate, priests with shaved scalps and raw throats, and in the center beneath the hanging iron, a figure stood in a coat of flensed leather strips and chain. He wore no helm. His face was finely cut, almost handsome, ruined by a lattice of small old scars. His eyes were very steady. He had the look of an officer who had learned obedience before command. The Bellmaster looked down at Vaikato, as if greeting a guest. "You came from the sea," he said, his voice the calm under all surf. "Good. All things return to it, even angels. You broke our reefs. You bled your men for our stones. Now I ring, the sky opens, and your fleet drowns in air." There was no foam at his lips, no wildness. It was worse because he believed like a soldier, quietly, with the whole of himself. "Your bell won't sing," Vaikato said and lifted his weapon. The Bellmaster smiled with one corner of his mouth. He extended a hand, palm up. Up close, the flaws in him showed. The scars were not all from blades. Some were old seam lines along the jaw, ridges that hinted at plates beneath skin. A nick on his palm bled not wholly red, but flecked with a faint wrong violet. His pupils did not track like a man's. They drew tight and relaxed with a slow, vertical flicker, as if another set of lids had ideas about light. "You think this is chaos?" he asked softly. "Chaos is waste. We are inevitable. We rang your vigil silent. Your priests blamed demons, your officers blamed men. We were family. We are everywhere family. When this bell tolls, every kin brood from this island to the edge of your shipping lanes will wake and make ready tables. Your chapter will not drown in madness, only in welcome." His smile broadened gently, like a man remembering his first child's weight. Vaikato angled his helm a fraction. The fury he felt was cold. The so-called forces of chaos on this world were Genestealers all along. "Your family dies here." The Bellmaster's face spread into a grin wider than a human's should be, showing sharp, pointed teeth as his brass-scarred hand closed into a fist. He clapped once. The chamber erupted. Guns on the side gantries opened in perfect overlap. 2 heavy weapons stitched the entrance. 2 more raked the higher angles. A satchel charge tumbled from a catwalk and blew the front left brother off his feet. The squad did not bunch. They split and flowed, 2 across the floor under the gantline shadow, 2 straight-up ladder rungs, tridents carried crosswise to catch a throat or block a muzzle. Vaikato took the long run to the central platform. Rounds struck his pauldron and sparked away. "Tex," he voxed, "the lines." "We need 40 seconds," came the reply. Hands already on wheels and levers. "Hold the platform. If they open the air feeds, the resonator actuates." 40, Vaikato repeated, then cut to the outer net. "Hestian's status." "Encirclement holds," a captain crackled back. "They're testing West Berm. We are—" A detonation cut the line. A calmer voice replaced it. "We are holding. West gun still firing." "Good. Keep the noose tight." The bell swayed in all this wind like a thing that yearned to speak. The pressure in the air pulsed, 1, 2, 3, like a distant heartbeat learning its drum. Koata's squad broke a gantry by shooting its support pins. 3 defenders fell with it and were finished before they rose. On the floor, a brother pinned a gunner's wrist to the rail with a trident tine and fired 2 clean bursts into his ribs. The next brother vaulted him, grabbed the traverse handle and walked the gun's fire into the opposite nest, the muzzle never drifting outside discipline. A priest with a flensing hook reached a tech marine's back. Tahu's answering burst scissored him into smoke and cloth. Tahu strode through a blown loading bay like a walking bastion, armor streaked with ash. Heavy flamer spitting ropes of fire. Autogun rounds sparked and flattened on his sarcophagus. A rocket hit him square in the chest. He rocked back a step and laughed, a grinding, delighted thunder on the channel. "You'll need better fireworks," he rumbled, and his assault cannon turned the launcher crew into mist. Tech Marines worked like men in a burning ward. Blue 6 sealed, one voxed, resin foaming along a flange. Green 3 is binding, force required. Force applied, came another. Servo limbs whining as a wheel shrieked and turned. Orange 1 exposed. Whoever cut this line doesn't understand pressure, they understand patterning. Then unmake their pattern, Koata said. Seal the mouths, smother the song. Vaikato closed on the central platform. The Bellmaster dropped lightly from the gantry to meet him. He drew a blade no longer than his forearm. It was not ornate. It had been sharpened and sharpened again until the line of it was as fine as a whisper. He moved like a man who had learned to fence in cramped rooms. They cut at each other without ceremony. Trident caught blade, locked, slid, disengaged. The trident's butt came for knee and hip. The knife turned and kissed the haft. Twice the knife bit Vaikato's vambrace and left bright scratches. Twice the trident smashed iron and set the bell thrumming with a low, eager note. "Do you hear it?" the Bellmaster asked, eyes steady, breath soft. "It already loves your name." "I hear a dead thing," Vaikato said, and drove him back with a flurry that would have broken a lesser wrist. The Bellmaster folded around the force, stepped inside, and for an instant his coat swung wide at the ribs. What lay beneath was not quite a man's symmetry. A second shoulder ridge showed under the skin like a ghost organ. The pectoral line parted wrong when he twisted, as though another set of muscles had been trained to pretend. His teeth, when he smiled again, were very even, very white, very regular. "You cannot cut blood from blood," he murmured, and feinted so honestly it almost landed. Only Vaikato's dock-learned reflex of hooking a haft behind an ankle saved him. He wrenched, dragged the Bellmaster forward off balance, and slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, driving him toward the bell's pedestal. The knife kissed Vaikato's gorget and skittered. The trident's point sank into iron and made the bell throb, a pulse that ran out through the floor and into the walls and into the chimneys and into the air, a test beat of a pulse as yet unborn. 30 seconds, the Tech Marine voxed. 2 feeds left. If they open the air, the resonator actuates and the waveform will cross into... Koata's voice cut in. "I don't speak Tech Marine, Tavake. Translation?" "If it tolls," Tavake replied, and even his machine-modulated tone flickered with disquiet. "The signal will walk machine spirits and minds across system-wide routes. It will call, not to warp, but to any kin minds attuned to it. Every brood cell within broadcast range will receive instruction. If there are sleepers off-world, on the supply moons, on the route stations, if there are ships with stowaway clades, sector-level contagion," Koata finished flat. "Understood." The chamber seemed to lean toward the bell. Men on gantries shouted oaths that were shaped like prayers, but not to saints a human tongue might name. A priest slit his palm and smeared blood on a lever. A handler pulled a valve wheel and a hiss answered somewhere in the iron. "Airline opening," a Tech Marine barked. "They're trying..." Tahu stepped into the airfeed's shadow and bathed the lever in fire until the metal ran. "Try harder," he said pleasantly. On the platform, the knife came low, then high, then vanished. The Bellmaster moved with terrifying economy. Vaikato parried, felt the blade skitter, turned the haft, and brought the lower point up in a short arc that would have split a man from belly to heart. The Bellmaster twisted in a way no human joint had license to twist. The point grazed and slid, and in that grazing scrape, Vaikato felt the truth in his bones. This thing wore a man like a first fitting. It had learned him. It believed in a family that had other shapes. 15, the Tech Marine whispered, strain in his augmetic pistons. Green 3 locked. Orange 1 Primarch preserve me turns against the thread. The bellmaster hissed a not-quite word. It chittered around the edges. It made the pressure behind the teeth spike. The wall aperture nearest Holden belched cultists. They came in a compact wave, disciplined, weapons tight, 2 with charges, 1 with a drum to keep cadence. The Hestians on the west berm were ready. "On my word," the captain breathed and lifted his hand. When he chopped it down, the line fired as one. The first rank folded. The second rank stepped into the holes and fired back with grim poise, rounds pinging off sandbags and helmets. A charge man made the gap. Holden rose and shot him twice center mass, and once in the throat and felt nothing. Another made the lip of the berm. Leahy bayoneted him in the lung and kicked him back down the slope. The third charge man flung his pack. It landed short. The blast filled the air with dust and the taste of detonator. Holden wiped grit from his mouth with the back of his hand and realized he had spoken without knowing it. For Kaunongan. The words had shaped themselves and gone. He kept firing. The line held. Inside, Koata fired on the move and vaulted a ruptured line, his sword a streak of cracking light. "Finish it," he voxed, breath perfectly steady. "Taken," Vaikato said, and committed. He feinted high with the outer tine and stepped inside as the blade moved to parry, hooking the haft hard behind the bellmaster's calf and wrenching, dockyard judo learned on wet stone. With the same motion, he rammed his armored shoulder into the chest and drove the knot man toward the stanchion. The bellmaster turned the trip into a fall that saved him from the first killing thrust. The trident slammed iron and made the bell answer, a hungry infant sound. A burst snapped across the platform. Not gunfire, but the sharp metallic bark of Vaikato's boot impacting steel as he surged forward. The bellmaster struck first, impossibly fast, even with one arm slicked from earlier blows. The knife flickered low, then high, then gone. Only the blur of intent remained. Vaikato met the assault head-on. His gauntlet snapped out, caught the bellmaster's wrist mid-feint and wrenched. Bone, or what passed for bone, cracked like green wood. The blade fell. The bellmaster did not scream. He only stared at the ruined limb with that same disturbing curiosity, as if observing a tool failing in unexpected ways. Then, with his remaining strength, he lunged and clamped the injured hand, fingers too long, tendons too many, around Vaikato's trident haft in a grip meant to resist the inevitable. Vaikato did not allow it. Vaikato twisted. Bones cracked. The hand slipped. The trident's head went in clean between ribs and out the back, pinning the bellmaster to the stanchion. The trident punched deeper, pinning the bellmaster to the bell's pedestal. Metal rang. The creature's breath hitched once, a sound halfway between a gasp and a question, as if it still could not understand how a thing of flesh and bone had stopped it. Vaikato leaned his weight onto the haft. "This family," he said quietly, "ends here." For an instant, the pressure behind the teeth ceased. The bell seemed to hang in breathless suspension, as if the iron paid attention to the last look in a face that could not quite keep its mask. The bellmaster's composure peeled a fraction. The cheekbones spread too wide. The jaw worked on a hinge not meant for a human skull, and when the mouth opened, a thin inner frill of tissue flickered, failing to decide which set of instincts to obey. "You cannot," he tried, and the last word came out as a soft animal click. "Third feed sealed," the tech marine barked. "Dumping pressure now." He spun the final wheel. Resin foamed. Clamps shook. Deep in the manufactorum, a relief valve screamed open. The bell gave a final frustrated shiver and went quiet, not merely in sound, but in the way the air stopped tasting wrong. The second heartbeat in everyone's mouth went away. "Detonate residuals," Koata ordered. "Burn the paint. Sanctify what can be saved. Tahu, cut their air for good." Flamers washed sigils from walls. Tech Marines broke manifolds and poured blessed oil down their throats. Chaplains raised croziuses and spoke in voices as calm as rain. The black standard of 3rd Company unfurled from the gantry like a night flower. Outside, the encirclement bent, then straightened. The hybrids tried one last sally and ran into a curtain of Hestian fire that cut them down in rows. Holden stood in that line, cheek to stock, the seashell charm tight in his fist between shots. When the last attacker fell, he lowered his rifle by inches, and only then noticed his mouth had shaped words again. We did. He felt tired enough to sleep for a week. He felt like a wire pulled taut, and at last let go. "Hold fast," the captain said, softer now. "It's done." Within the bell hall, Vaikato tugged his trident free and let the body slide to the grate. It twitched, not a death spasm, but a strange rhythmical shiver, as if some far signal had not yet learned that this node was dark. He watched the face sag, and as it sagged, the illusion of symmetry slipped. The teeth were too even, the palate too wide. The jaw hung a fraction too low, as if it had once learned to open farther and could not now forget. A faint, sour odor rose, like stale yeast. "Not chaos," Koata said, helm lenses narrowing. "A brood." The word hung like a cold draft. They had thought they fought madmen whipped by devils. They understood now they had fought something older, colder, breeding still. "Range?" Koata asked, turning to the tech marine whose auspex hummed with fresh readings. The adept's voice was flat with data. The resonator would have bled into every channel that can carry a mind: vox, machine noosphere, astropathic harmonics. With the Manufactorum's wind stacks, the signal would have piggybacked thermal columns to the high air. Effective broadcast, if unopposed, to the whole Kaunongan cluster and along trade relays to at least 3 neighboring systems. Anything kin-tuned in port cities, mining hubs, pilgrim stations, any sleeper clade would have heard. Some would have woken now, others would have taken instruction, nested, waited. Vaikato tasted iron in his mouth. Sector-level contagion. Yes. Koata lifted his helm and spoke on the command band. "Chapter Master." Aranga Moana's reply came from orbit, deep and steady as the deeps. "We read the pressure drop. We read your banner. What do you see, Koata?" "Our foe is not the arch-enemy. A Genestealer brood. Their bell was a psychic amplifier, not sorcery. If it had told, it would have called kin to uprising along the lanes. Not only this world, neighbor systems. Maybe farther, if echoes caught the right weather." The long pause held no surprise, only measure. "Understood," Aranga said at last. "Transmit all captures and auspex. I will warn the astropaths and the sector fleet. Quarantine advisories to all ports in the chain. We salt every manufactorum like this we find. We burned a reef. There may be shoals we cannot yet see." Koata's gaze moved once to the corpse at his brother's feet, then to the black iron above them. "Aye, Chapter Master." They came out into light made thin by smoke. Hestians were already stacking weapons, gathering prisoners, laying their dead in orderly rows. Priests moved between them like black gulls on a bleak shore. Tahu stood half sunk in a crater, the grime on his hull washed to streaks by a sudden shower. He lifted one arm in a clanking salute. "About time," he rumbled, and no one tried to hide their tired grins. A few hundred meters away, Holden sat with his comrades, watching the Astartes emerge from the complex. Leahy followed his gaze. "Do you think they noticed us at all?" he asked. Holden nodded slowly, as if setting a stone in his mind. He looked down at the seashell in his palm. It felt foolish and sacred at once. "We held," he said, "and we will again, not bravado, not prayer. Information." He surprised himself hearing it. By dusk, the Manufactorum's chimneys gave off only steam, No more breath for the bell. Hestian banners hung above the gates, salt-stained and torn. The chapter's black standard moved in the evening air like a piece of night that had decided to stay. Signal crews hammered up a mast on the roof and flagged fresh codes inland. Medici stacked their last blood bags and counted them against names. Engineers welded a seal plate over the bell gantry's master switch and stamped it with the chapter's sigil. On the ridgeline, Koata stood with his helm under his arm and watched the long grey line of the sea. The beachhead glittered with lamps. The inland fires dwindled to embers. Vaikato stood beside him, the trident's shadow long. "We dragged the tide across stone," Koata said. "I think we broke the throne-damned stone," Vaikato answered. Above them, the tide's eternal held her station, a dark moon over a darker sea. Chapter Master Aranga Moana's final orders came on a channel that sounded almost like quiet surf. Reform, recover, remember. Task Force Matanui will sweep the chain for brood signs, astropathic warning to the whole Kaunongan subsector and beyond, quarantine protocols for the pilgrim lanes. Where we find these bells, we break them. Where we find their families, we end them. The current carries us onward. The war was not ended everywhere. It rarely is. But here, on this island, on this shore, the last reef was broken, and a signal that could have awakened a sector died in iron, oil, and blood, beneath the boots of men who had learned to stand in the surf and not be moved. And the tide was with them.